If you have your Bibles, Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2. And up until this point in the letter, it's been heavy. This is a letter about unbreakable joy in the face of suffering. So it's a letter that's wrapped around suffering, and he's reminding us how to have a lot of joy. And it's been full of a lot of heavy theological points and suffering. And this week, Paul's going to really take a breath in his letter. And I love this because when he takes this breath, I found his focus in this part of the letter to just be a refreshing reminder of what relational faithfulness can look like in our lives. And so this week, we're going to talk about what relational faithfulness might look like for you and from you this week. But over here, I have two chairs. I asked the band to bring up two chairs, place them on the stage. These two chairs represent your life. This first chair is your public life. I like to label this your Instagram life. These are the things that you put on Instagram, Facebook, the things you want other people to see. If you were going to create a perfect example of what your life doesn't fully look like, that's this chair. It doesn't have any of the hard stuff. It's like you when you're getting ready to go out on a date with your husband and you take a picture because you've already gotten ready. It's you when your kids are actually sitting at the table all together, not throwing spaghetti all over the place. It's you when life is easy, and it's you when you're at your best. And you know what? The funny thing about this chair, people have no problem sitting in it with you. They will sit in this chair with you all day long. When your kids are successful, when your life is going well, when you're getting the praise at work that you deserve, when you look at your best, when you're not having illnesses or loss, people will sit in this chair and they will celebrate with you and they will have no problem. The problem is there's a second chair. And this chair, this is the chair of loss. When someone in your life that you've leaned on for years and loved for years and developed relationships for years, when someone in your life is taken away, this is the chair of loss and grief. This is the chair of unexpected suffering. When you get that diagnosis that you never thought about when you were 20, but now that you're in your 40s or 50s or seasoned vintage age, now you face words you never thought you'd hear. When that spouse that you stood across from and you said, "I do," for richer or for poorer, for better or for worse, when that spouse decides that those words no longer apply, this is the chair that you sit in. And the problem with that chair is that everybody wants to sit in the first chair. The problem with chair number 2 is that it's really hard to find people that will sit with you in chair number 2 when life is hard, when you're crying and making them uncomfortable because you're crying. When you have loss that they can't fix. When you have grief they can't understand. This is the chair of infertility. This is the chair of wayward kids. This is the chair of suffering and hardships. And yet, it's also the loneliest chair on this stage. Today we're going to ask the question, what does it look like to sit in the second chair? I think Paul's going to ask us two questions really through this text. He's going to use this text to talk about friends who sit in the second chair. And he's going to ask us first, when your life is on the line, who will sit in the second chair with you? As you look around your life and you think about who's in your life, when you think about the relationships you've developed, when you think about the relationships you've poured into, when you think about the relationships that mean the most to you, who will sit in the second chair with you? Because you may not be sitting there today, but you will sit there again. Who is in your community? And second, who is someone you'd sit with in that second chair without even thinking twice? Who's that person in your life that you know if they call you at 3 a.m. and you don't have your phone on Do Not Disturb like I do, you will be there? Who you're not afraid to sit in the sorrow and the suffering with? See, I would submit to you that I believe the Bible teaches us that we ought to have both sets of relationships. That we are called to love well and allow ourselves to be loved well. And for whatever reason, we have trouble with both. We have trouble loving well because it's inconvenient. Because it always seems to happen after bedtime. Or on the weekend. Or just when we don't want to put up with it. But we also have trouble being loved well because in our minds that's weakness. When somebody else needs something from us, that makes us feel like we're not enough. But the Bible's clear. There are moments of weakness in your life you need someone to sit in the second chair with you. And there are moments where people you love will need you to sit in the second chair with them. And being surrounded by people, it's not the same as being known by people. And Paul tells us now in Philippians 2, who in his life, the people in his life that were willing to sit in the second chair with him. Look at verse 19. He says, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, so that I too may be cheered by news of you. He introduces us to this guy named Timothy. He's talked about him in other letters, and Luke talks about him a lot in the book of Acts. And as Luke talks about him, he tells the story of how Paul met Timothy. Look at Acts 16, starting in verse 1. Paul came also to Derbe and to Lystra. A disciple was there named Timothy, the son of a Jewish woman who was a believer, but his father was a Greek. Verse 2, he was well spoken of by the brothers at Lystra and Iconium. So what's happening, and Paul reveals a lot in his letters to Timothy, but what's happening behind the scenes is that his mother, Timothy's mother and grandmother were the primary disciplers in Timothy's life. It wasn't, by the way, his dad, who was a pagan. It was his mother and his grandmother, which, by the way, when we do baptisms, I said dads. I don't mean just dads. Like moms are welcome in there as well. I believe discipleship happens in the home. And in Timothy's case, it was his mom and his grandmother. And because they poured into his life, this young Timothy was well spoken of by the brothers, the Christian church at Lystra and Iconium. And so Paul meets this Timothy, and he sees a potential that maybe most people didn't see because he's young. And Paul specifically writes to Timothy and says, don't let people look down on you because of your age. But Paul sees a potential in him. And he invites him along on his missionary journeys. And in Acts 17, we see Paul's in Berea, and as he's there, he meets this opposition, and Timothy sticks by him when things get tough. He wasn't just in it when the mega church grew to 5,000 people and everybody loved going on Sundays. He was in it when things got tough, when opposition hit. Acts chapter 20, even more opposition hits. This time it's not in Berea. This time it's in Greece, in the city of Athens. And Paul's just gotten done preaching to the intellects at Athens. And he preaches to them, and people from surrounding areas come in, and they have this plot against Paul's life. And Timothy is there in the trenches of Greece. Timothy didn't just show up for Paul once. He showed up over and over and over, and he stayed. He stayed through the danger. He stayed through the disappointment, and he stayed through the uncertainty. So how does Paul describe Timothy in the Bible? Romans 16, verse 21, he uses a term in the Greek that's translated in the English, close worker. If we just read that in the English, we're like, oh, okay, he was like a co-worker. No, he was a co-laborer. And in fact, the language in the Greek that Paul uses is the language that has familial context. He's not just a co-worker, he's family. If that's not enough, in 1 Corinthians 4, Paul calls him his faithful child. There's a relationship that's deepening as they do life together, as they share this time together, as they pour into each other. And later, Paul would see so much potential in Timothy that he would entrust him with the church at Ephesus, one of the most important churches in what we call modern-day Turkey. And he would become their faithful pastor. And here in Philippians now, in verse 20, he's going to show us just how close him and Timothy are. Look at verse 20 and following. For I have no one like him who will be genuinely concerned for your welfare. For they all seek their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. So remember back a few weeks ago when I was here last, Paul reminds the church not to look or fix their eyes on their own interest, but to look or fix their eyes on the interest of others. And now he's saying, I only have one that I know who lives like that, and it's Timothy. He says this, I only have one who will seek everyone else's interest, but I have many who seek their own interests. These are people like, they say, hey, I'll help you move unless you have a piano. Like, then I'm out. But this line, this verse should shock the church. Because what he's talking about, he's not talking about the pagans in Rome. He's not writing about the Greek scholars in Athens. He's writing about the church, Christians who have professed their faith in Jesus Christ, and he says almost no one genuinely cares. And it should shock the church, but it doesn't. It doesn't shock the church. Like, we know what the Bible says, but it doesn't shock us because we've had our own experiences in church where it's hard to find people who will sit in the second chair. And it causes us to ask this question: what would Paul say about us? If he were here writing this passage to our church, would he look around and say, man, this church is full of a bunch of people who will sit in that second chair? When grief and suffering and loss enters into the equation, man, there are people who will look at the interests of others, not just their own. Or will he say, man, there's a lot of first chair people in that church? Now, by God's grace, I believe we have a lot of second chair people in here. I really do. And I promise you, we will always be a second chair church. We will always be a church that's willing to walk through hard things with you. Now, that doesn't mean I will walk through hard things with 400 different people. It means our church is full of second chair people willing to sit in the hardness of life. It's not something the pastor just does. I will do it. But it's something that believers do. And we will be that church. And if you're not looking for a church where you're expected to be a second chair person, then this is not the church for you. Let me save time. Don't go to join one church. This is not the church for you. We will be a second chair church. We will care well for each other. We will love each other. We will sit in the hard together. That's who we'll be. And by God's grace, we will always be that. And we ask this question, what would Paul say about us? Because he's writing to a church full of believers. And we look and we go, yeah, we're not always second chair people, because here's the problem. Sin doesn't just make us rebellious, it makes us curved inward. We have this natural bent to take care of our own needs and desires. Financially, emotionally, physically. We have this need to take care of our own desires. And what it creates is redeemed people who choose and drift towards convenience over commitment, who drift towards comfort over cost, who drift towards efficiency over empathy. And the truth is, we don't drift towards community, we drift naturally away from it. But I think the reason that faithful friendships are rare is because in order to have it, the gospel has to reshape who and what we love. It has to take us from a fallen person who fixes their eyes on our own interest into a person who will sit in the second chair. And only the gospel can do that. See, the second chair is for gospel love, for people who are willing to pay the price to sit in it. The gospel comes to bear in our life, and now all of a sudden, who and what, and I would add how we love changes. Paul has truly found something in Timothy that's rare and valuable. Look at verse 22. But you know Timothy's proven worth, how as a son with a father, he has served with me in the gospel. He says, I hope, therefore, to send him just as soon as I see how it will go with me. But this, he says, and I trust that in the Lord shortly I myself will come also. I don't think so. He won't. But he's got Timothy, who's willing to take on the role when he no longer can. Paul says some interesting words in verse 22. He says, you know Timothy's proven worth, how as a son with a father he has served with me in the gospel. It's interesting, not everybody has a great relationship with their dad. It's the truth. And for some of you think about dad and you think about God in the same term, and you're like, how could God be a father? Like, my father was horrible. And I get that, and I have sympathy and empathy for you. And for most of my life, that was my story. My dad wasn't horrible, but he was just disconnected. And then my dad got Alzheimer's. We started to notice it at our wedding. And for 10 years, he started to slowly drift away. We put him in a VA facility. They had a memory care unit. He had an ankle monitor and locked doors. But we couldn't take care of him ourselves. But I had power of attorney. And so with that came a responsibility to visit often, to take care of his finances. I would take him out to lunch. Get this, I would take him out to Buffalo Wild Wings, even though I knew when we sat down, he would hit on the waitress. Inevitably. My dad thought he was 25 again, and he was like, hey, can I get your number? I'm like, Dad. One time, he hit on my sister. And he forgot who she was, and she never saw him again. To be honest, she never went back. She's like, he doesn't know who I am, and I'm not putting myself in that position. Like, but the point is, like, there are a lot of sons out there who are willing to sit in the second seat with their parents. If you have a good relationship and you are willing, some of you are doing it right now. I'm looking at you. I know you're walking through hard times with your parents. As you take care of parents who are aging, I know you are doing it, and you're willing to do it because you love them. Paul calls Timothy his son. Their relationship is so close that that's how Paul views him. And here's what's amazing. We all have family we didn't get to choose. Like that uncle that comes to like Thanksgiving and you're like, why are we inviting him? Or that brother, I don't even need to say anything else, so you know what I'm talking about. But friends, faithful friends are family you get to choose. I remember, for some of you, you know the story, I've told it before, but for others of you, this will be new. When my second daughter, who's not here, she's at home sick, watching online, when she was 9 years old, she was diagnosed with cancer, Langerhans cell histiocytosis, and for a year, she went through chemo. But not just chemo, which caused her hair to thin, but also weekly and then every few weeks, eventually every few weeks, dosage of prednisone, which if you've ever been on long-term prednisone, you know it gives you something called moon face. You can't prevent it, you just walk through it. And I'll remember, the Allen family, I will never forget them. We will see them when we go back to Fresno this summer, but we haven't talked to them in a long time. Every now and then he asks me if I want to join his fantasy football league. But I will never forget that family and for what they did for us. See, Cayman Allen was Kenzie's best friend. And they were inseparable. Kindergarten, no joke. Okay, so this is the way we're wired. It's probably part of our sin nature. But kindergarten, Kenzie walks in, sees another small blonde-haired girl with blue eyes and sits next to her, and they become hard and fast friends. Like they were inseparable until we moved here. It was the hardest part about moving here easily. That and our life group there. Separating them was the hardest decision Kristen and I made when we made the decision to move here. And I will never forget when she got diagnosed, when she started to get puffy. Cayman's parents came to us. And they said, so Cayman was 9 also, and she was a little thing, but she was feisty. But Cayman had a brother and a sister who were twins in 5th grade. And her parents came to us and they said, we told our kids, if any kid messes with Kenzie, they know what to do. We'll deal with the consequences later. I knew they were talking about punching him in the face, and I was fine with it. They had my girls back. They were willing to put their kids on the line to do it. And I will never forget that. Ever. Faithful friends are family that you choose. And rare friendships aren't accidental. They're chosen and they're cultivated and they're protected. Paul and Timothy, up until this point, they've done life together. Hard life. They've done faithful life. They've done fulfilling life together. They didn't just wake up in need and Paul looks around and is like, hey, you want to join me? They've done life together. They've developed this relationship. And as Paul writes from prison, he can't help but think about his faithful friend Timothy. But Paul has another friend that he thinks fondly of. Look at verse 25. It says, I have thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier and your messenger and minister to my need. He says, he starts to give titles to this guy, Epaphroditus, and he says, first, he's family. We've done life together. He's a fellow worker, a fellow soldier. We're side by side in the same mission. He's the messenger. He's the faithful guy I'm sending to you. And not only that, but as I'm in prison, he's ministering to my need. He's sitting with me in the second chair. And Paul shows us through Epaphroditus that faithful friendships are based on shared needs. When Paul had a need, Epaphroditus met that need. It wasn't just Paul's need, it became Epaphroditus' need. And when Epaphroditus had a need, it became Paul's need. And when Timothy had a need, it became Paul's need. And when Paul had a need, it became Timothy's need. Faithful friendships are based in shared needs. He's going to continue now in verse 26 talking about this man Epaphroditus, for he's been longing for you all and has been distressed because you heard that he was ill. He says he's been longing for you. This guy Epaphroditus, he's sick, far from home. He knows the church heard that he was sick, and he's distressed, not about dying. He's distressed because they're distressed. He's distressed because he worried them. They're on a mission together. He doesn't want them to be distracted. He's not anxious about his illness. He's anxious that all the people he loves are anxious. And Paul writes in verse 27, indeed, he was ill, near to death, but God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. Paul looks at Epaphroditus and says, praise God that he was healed, that he didn't die, because if he died, it wouldn't just be him who died, it would be a piece of me who died. That's a deep love. And it shows us that faithful friendships are based in shared burdens. Paul's burden was for Epaphroditus, but Paul was in prison, and Epaphroditus' burden was for Paul. You can't have faithful friendships without shared burdens. Time and time again, the Bible calls us to bear one another's burdens. Not just when it's convenient. I remember, this is not, by the way, just a time for me to share all the low points of my life, but I'm going to. And it's not all of them, trust me. My sister was 27, and her husband disappeared for 24 hours. After 24 hours, the police finally did something. They were useless. It was awful. I love the police, but they did not show up for us when we needed them in this case. And after 24 hours, they actually did what we requested 16 hours prior and pinged his phone and found his phone locked in his car with his wallet at a trailhead in California. A famous trailhead. Lots of TV shows were shot there. It's also the place they did their wedding pictures. He wanted to send a message. That Sunday, our church canceled services and sent a search party out where they found his phone. And after a little while of looking, a junior high student, I don't even know why he was there. He shouldn't have been. And his dad found him with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. I was guest preaching at a church. I remember looking back, the doors were in the center, and my father-in-law and Kristen's brother were standing in the back of the room just waving their hands. Like, I was at point 2 out of point 3 in my sermon. Like, I've evolved. I'm not a 3-point sermon preacher anymore. You're welcome. But then I was through two of my points. Like, the sermon wasn't near done. And they're just standing in the back. I remember them going, like, you need to wrap up. And I'd let the elders of the church know what had been going on, and they were prepared to step in. I said, guys, I'm so sorry, I got to go. And the church had no clue. It would be like if I said that right now. You would have no clue why I said it. But the elders knew, and they stepped in, and they finished things and wrapped things up. Probably prayed, I would imagine. When I get to the back, they said, we found him. He's not with us anymore. I'm so sorry. And we think you need to be the one to tell your sister. I was like, really? You can have that honor. But they were right. And so I remember we drove back to my house where everybody was at. And as I walked in the front door, my sister saw the look on my face, and she just screamed, no. It's a scream I can still hear. And as she screamed no, she hit the floor. She was standing up. She hit the floor. And I rushed over to her, and I just held her for what felt like 4 hours. I just held her, and I said, I'm so sorry. And I cried over her, and we cried together. But you know what? The miracle was not that he came home safe. The miracle was that happened next, because people stayed. They stayed days and weeks and months. They came to our house. They slept in the same bed as her, holding her at night when she was weeping. They brought food and they gave money and they supported her in every way possible. The miracle was not that we got out of the suffering. The miracle was that God brought his people that were willing to sit in the second chair in the middle of the suffering. God doesn't always bring us out of the suffering, but he uses his people to sit with us in the second chair. I remember looking at Kristen going, how could we do this? Like she moved in with us. She stayed with us for a year. She threatened suicide 3 times. I said, how can I do this? How can we do this? And Kristen said, we can't, but God can. And God did. And as she started to heal, God brought a young man into her life who had his own demons, his own struggles, and they got married, and it hasn't been happily ever after. They had infertility issues, and now they're married and happy and have 4 kids. She just had twins at 36. It's crazy. But for someone who thought they were going to have 0 kids, to have 4 kids that are biologically their own, God showed up, and he provided. And she's not stuck in the sorrow. Sure, she still misses her first husband. But she's seen God's goodness through people who were willing to sit in the second chair with her. Epaphroditus' burden was also Paul's burden because the love that they had for her, or for each other. And he writes this, he says in verse 28, he says, I'm the more eager to send him, therefore that you may rejoice at seeing him again, and that I may be less anxious. His health is going to ease my anxiety for you. He says, so receive him in the Lord with all joy and honor such men. He says, for he nearly died for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was lacking in your service to me. Hey, church, you didn't show up, but he did. And because he was willing to complete what was lacking in your service, because you just wanted to show up on a Sunday and blend in, because you weren't willing to join in the mission, he was, and he almost died for it. So receive him with joy. He was on fire for the gospel, this man Epaphroditus. So much so that he was willing to die for the mission to support the work that Paul was doing. He shared the dedication to the gospel that Paul had. And Paul shows us that faithful friendships are based on shared passion. See, Christian love is not theoretical. It shows up. It shows up in exhaustion. It shows up in inconvenience. It shows up in emotional exposure. And it shows up in physical risk. See, the gospel, what's interesting about the gospel is it doesn't promise that you won't suffer. There's nowhere in the Bible that says health, wealth, and prosperity is real. Like, it doesn't say you won't go through hard times. It doesn't say your life won't ever be harder than you want it to be. In fact, Jesus promises that in this world you have trials of many kinds. He promises the opposite. But the funny thing about the gospel, the beautiful thing about the gospel, is that it doesn't eliminate suffering. It redistributes it through friendship. See, when you do construction, and I'm not a construction guy. Some of you are. I like you to help me do the things I need to do. Like I can fix things sometimes, but construction's outside of really my purview. But you don't preach, so it's okay. What I understand about construction is that you have to distribute weight across a larger area the more weight you have. So like you can't put all the weight. It's why like your house has several load-bearing walls in it. Like you can't put all of the weight in one place, or Chase, what happens? It falls down. I don't even have to be in construction, and I know that. Like it falls down, and so you have to distribute it across several places. That's what the gospel does. It distributes your pain and suffering through friendships. And it's a beautiful thing. See, when life happens, God puts people in your life to help redistribute the suffering. So, as Paul sits, as he sits in prison on the hard concrete of his jail cell, all he can think about is his closest friends. He's finding joy in the relationships that God has brought him. Friends who would do anything for him, friends that he knows will continue the mission if he can't, friends who have sat in the second chair with him. But I noticed as I read through this passage, like, what could God have done? Well, God could have strengthened Paul directly. He could have broken him out of prison. He could have changed the Roman government's mind. He could have healed Epaphroditus instantly without the need for prayer or people. He could have comforted the Philippian church supernaturally without sending Timothy and Epaphroditus. But instead of taking away their suffering, he chose to give them relational grace. And the truth is that God often meets our deepest needs through faithful people, not miraculous shortcuts. God often meets our deepest needs through faithful people, not miraculous shortcuts. But the problem is that we live in a culture where many of us, not all of us, but many of us are busy but disconnected. We're spiritually informed but relationally shallow. And here's a new one. We're technologically connected, but relationally isolated. I spent this week feeling a little nostalgic. So my algorithm has shifted on Instagram, and all of a sudden I'm seeing all these, like, the 90s were the best era ever reels. And I'm like, amen. But you know what was amazing about the 90s? Things brought us together. I was talking to Kristen about this the other night. Like, I miss TGIF. Like, I miss that you had a TV date every Friday night. Like, where it's Friday night, there's no school. You guys almost started singing the song. It's Friday night. Anyway, gonna have some fun. Show you how it's done. TGIF. Okay, good. It's not just me. It brought us together. Full House brought us together. Family Matters brought us together. Step by Step brought us together. Whatever fourth show they put in there, because they switched it up all the time, brought us together. Shows like Saved by the Bell brought us together. We had wholesome TV that we could watch together. We don't have that anymore. Some of you have to wait till the kids go to bed so you can watch the shows you like. I get it. But things brought us together. We had parents who sat in the driveway and watched their kids ride bikes out front. We had neighbors who came over and sat in a lawn chair together. Those, like, rickety lawn chairs that had the plastic little straws going across it. And when their kids skinned their knee, they didn't run over like they were dying. They just said, rub some dirt on it and get up. The truth is, look, technology has lied to us. It's told us that you can find meaningful relationships through a screen. That is not true. You need to go the extra mile and drive down the street to your friend's house. You need to set up play dates that are adult play dates. We do it for our kids. Do it for yourselves. Facebook and Instagram they're not something that can take the place of real, meaningful, faithful friendships. But we've come to the place where we're technologically connected but relationally isolated. But the problem is, and here's your takeaway for this morning, the problem is that God's grace often comes with a name. God's grace often comes with a name. It's the name of a faithful friend. It's the name of someone you've been walking with or who's been walking with you. It's that someone who lives a few doors down from you, but you talk over Facebook or text message more than you do sitting next to each other. What would it look like for you to take up a chair in your driveway? What does it look like? And why are faithful friendships important? Well, first, faithful friendships guard us from isolation. Isolation is a danger. It's a danger to your spiritual health. It's a danger to your physical health. It's a danger to your emotional health. Isolation is not good for any of us. There's a well-documented scientific or medical research. It's called the widowhood effect. And what they studied and what they found is that when a spouse dies, the surviving partner's risk of death increases, especially in the first year. Why is that? Well, two things. First of all, we've bought into the lie that our spouse is the only best friend we should have. That's a lie. Now, I do think your spouse is the only best friend of the opposite sex that you should have, but you need same-gender relationships. You need dudes who will sit next. Look, I've never been hunting one time in my life. That's actually not true. I went hunting one time, quail hunting, and I had a better chance of shooting the people I went with than the actual quail. Those suckers are fast. I heard something in the tree, I went, psh, and I didn't look who was over there. I had no clue. But from what I hear, some good relationships happen in duck blinds. I've never been in one, but I watched a lot of Duck Dynasty. Because you're shoulder to shoulder sitting there with nothing else to do but talk about life. I don't know what your duck blind is, but you can create a space where you have that same gender relationship. Men, the truth is, we're notorious for shallow relationships. We're notorious for relationships where we're willing to go duck hunting, just don't talk to me about what's going on in your marriage. We're willing to play softball, but don't sit down with me when you experience loss. We're notorious for not wanting to sit in that second chair. In fact, we would be really happy if I took that chair and threw it off the stage right now because it's making everybody uncomfortable because they know they don't want to sit in that second chair. But ladies, you need same-gender relationships as well. And I'm about to go someplace that's dangerous. It's very dangerous for a man to stand on stage and tell women what they do. But I feel like as your pastor, I need to share with you something that I've recognized. And I will say this is not every woman, so feel free to put yourself in that not every woman category. But what I do notice is that a lot of female relationships are often two things. First, they're catty, and second, they're draining. They're catty because, I don't know why. I should have asked my wife. But I think they're draining because women feel deep emotions more than men do. And oftentimes we feel better when we let everything out, but we pick one person to let everything out on all the time. If I'm wrong, I accept it, but I don't think I am. And that may not be your experience overall, but I think that is true in a general sense. And I'm not dead, so that means I didn't offend people too much. But Paul reminds us that suffering doesn't destroy faith, suffering alone does. Suffering doesn't destroy faith. You're going to suffer, but suffering alone does. So faithful friends guard us from isolation, but faithful friends also show up when they're needed. Faithful friends show up when they're needed. Faithful friends do hard things. They do hard things for us because they're faithful friends. What do I mean by that? Well, Proverbs 27:6 tells us this: faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. What that means is the people in your life who are willing to tell you what you want to hear are not your friends. They are not there to help you. They are not sent by God. The people who tell you the hard things when you don't want to hear it, those are your faithful friends. Faithful are the hard things they say to you, the way that they keep you focused on God's word instead of what Satan wants you to choose. Faithful are the wounds of a friend because they love you enough to hurt you when they have to with the truth. Faithful friends do hard things. They love you enough to tell you the truth. They correct you without crushing you. They honor you in your absence when you're not there. They speak kindly of you. They choose faithfulness over comfort. And the truth is, they don't always have the right words, but their presence speaks volumes. Not only do they do hard things, but they also sit in hard things with you. Proverbs 27:9, just a few verses later, says, oil and perfume make the heart glad, and the sweetness of a friend comes from his earnest counsel. The sweetness of a friend comes from the fact that he or she is willing to sit with you, to guide you, to speak into your life, to sit in the second chair and love you really well. Faithful friends, they show up when it matters. They stay when it's uncomfortable. They carry weight that isn't yours, and they pay the cost without needing credit. Faithful friends create a space for honesty without fear. Now, just as Jared plays, I just want you just for a second to sit in your relationships. Even close your eyes if you have to. Think about the people in your life who have chosen to sit in the second chair with you. Think about the difficulties that led you to need them to sit in the second chair. Think about their willingness to love you well when things are hard. Just take a moment to celebrate that God loved you enough to send his grace through someone with a name. I want to leave you with 3 questions that I'd like for you to ponder this week. The first is, who knows the parts of you that you hope never get talked about in a sermon? Who knows the parts of you that if I called you up on stage right now and said, tell me about yourself, you would never say? Who knows those parts of you? Because I would submit to you that if nobody knows those things, you're not truly loved. You, who you are, is not truly loved. Some version that you think you have to be is fakely loved, falsely loved. Somebody needs to know the deep parts of you. Second, who would you show up for when life gets messy? Who in your life would you have no problem showing up for at 3 a.m. on a Saturday during work hours where you have to take some time off because somebody needs you? Who's that person? I believe we're called to have both sets of relationships. Maybe it's the same person. Maybe it's different people. I don't know. And then finally, what relationship step do you need to take this week? It could look different for everyone in here. Some of you need to start a conversation. Some of you need to reach out to someone and start getting to know some people. You've been isolating for too long. You've been in this church and you don't know anybody. You need to call me and say, how do I get connected? You need to go to Join One Church and start that process. I don't know what it is, but you need to start something so that you can have friends and people who sit in that second chair that aren't your spouse. Because when you experience loss, and when you experience grief, and when you experience financial hardships, so do they. Maybe you need to join a group. Maybe you are a member and you're like, man, I'm too busy. Life, I can't afford to be in a group. And I would tell you, you can't afford not to. Because we don't always see the second chair issues coming. In fact, most of the time we don't. And when we need someone and we haven't invested, it's already too late. Maybe you need to re-engage a relationship. Maybe you need to reach out to someone you haven't talked to in a while. Maybe you need to ask for help. Man, that's so hard. Or maybe this week you just need to offer presents to someone. My wife, I love her very much. And her and I are wired very differently when it comes to relationships. And I admire her. I was telling her this last night. I admire her so much for the way that she handles relationships. There's a depth about her. Look, she's not going to be everybody's friend in this church. I promise you that. If that's what you need, that's not the church for you. My wife's not wired that way. But she's wired in a beautiful way to go very deep with a few people that God puts in her life. I'm the type of guy that can have 1,000 friends. I'm good just making you feel, this is confession, I'm good just making you feel like I know you. It's been my job for 17 years. I can't possibly deeply know hundreds or thousands of people. I can't. But what I've realized is that there is a time in my life to go deep with a few select men in my life. And at times it may be you, and at other times it may not. The truth is, we don't need 100 friends. You need one or two who love Jesus and who are willing to sit in the second chair for you. They love you enough to say hard things and sit with you when things get tough. And I pray that we are always a church. And as long as I'm here, we will always be a church that's full of second chair people.